So here's what I meant by drying it in a kitchen towel. So I've got a clean kitchen towel here. I've spread my cilantro that's been rinsed off well under cold water in a single layer, and then I'm going to actually roll it up in my kitchen towel, and I'm just going to give it a few presses like that. And because they were spread out, all of the moisture that's on them should be absorbed by an absorbent kitchen towel. You can do it in paper towels too. It's just, I try not to use paper towels when I can use something that gets washed. So now they're actually really nice and dry, and they're ready to be chopped, and they will stay as separate nice cilantro pieces. If it wasn't dry, just fluff them again, roll it up, repeat. Okay, like that. Then unroll, and we're gonna drop them down. Off camera, I cleaned my cutting board because some of that sand had fallen on there, so I did clean off my cutting board so it wouldn't get cross-contaminated into my cilantro. So we have these stems, and sometimes on cilantro the stems are really delicate, and they're actually fine to use. There's a lot of flavor in them, but if they are woody or thick or tough, especially on another herb like parsley, you want to remove it, or thyme or rosemary. We don't really eat the stems on those when they're thick. So I'm just recollecting them, and for pico de gallo, I'm gonna be okay with some stems. The thick part here, I'm just gonna twist off and get rid of. But if I was being, you know, more perfect, I might actually pluck every leaf off the stem, and those would be used as a fancy garnish on something. But for pico de gallo, you know, anything that's thick, get rid of. But other ones that are really like bendy and delicate, they're fine to leave in your chopping. So we're going to rough chop the cilantro. And I did want to point out, when you're shopping for cilantro, it's always right next to the parsley. And if you're not used to buying it, you could get confused. The cilantro always has these feathery edges on the flat cilantro. Flat leaf parsley doesn't have them that feathery and separated. They're more like tree leaves. So that's one way to look at it, but also there should be labels. But you don't want to accidentally buy parsley for this recipe. That would not be good. All right, so I've got my pile here, and I've got my knife again, and I'm going to collect it in my hand, and I'm going to kind of roll it a little bit just to get control, and tip on the board, and my knife is just going to start slicing through with my guiding hand in the bear claw position, retreating as my knife comes toward the fluffy cilantro leaves. If you see a stem in that process that doesn't seem delicate, get rid of it. So then I'm going to collect and turn it about 90 degrees and come through again. So rough chopping again is when we're approaching a food item and we want sort of uniform size, but the shapes are going to end up all being different. We're not doing cubes. Okay. So now that it's settled down a little bit from being in smaller pieces, I sort of usually move my hand to the top of the knife, and I'm just going to come through a little bit faster with very determined downward slices. Turn it 90 degrees again, and come through maybe 1 or 2 more times, depending on how big you like the size of your cilantro. It's not going to be all the way down to minced. I don't want to go that far, where they're tiny pieces of confetti. It's just the way pico de gallo is, they're left a little bit larger. Even if this was just cilantro for going on a taco, I would leave it at this size. Okay, so there's my roughly chopped cilantro, and some people have that sensitivity to it. They're probably not going to go for the pico de gallo if they have that sensitivity, period. And you really just add it to taste when you're looking for it in a recipe. So I'll put that in a deli container, and then we'll assemble. We're finally ready to assemble. So pick it up, transfer it into my deli cup. For things like this, the bench scraper is really great. All right, and then I'm just going to rinse my hand off. All right, so the lime I'm going to cut in half, like that. And I always feel the limes in the grocery store for heavy ones that feel heavy have more juice. And I'm going to get my bowl, and I'm going to start with, I'm going to use all my tomatoes because I don't want to save them for anything. Lots of pico de gallo. So tomatoes, and then I'm going to start with about half my onion and see if I want to use more. And since this was that whole large and small jalapeno, I'm just going to use about quarter to a half of it and see if I want more jalapeno from there. So once I stir those three things together, I kind of get an idea of the ratio and see if it's how I like my pico de gallo to be. And I think a little more jalapeno, but I'm good on the onion in that. That feels right to me. So I'm gonna freeze the rest of this onion if I don't need it in the next 3 or 4 days in my kitchen. It freezes great for then using and sauteing things. Go a little more jalapeno. And I'm gonna add my cilantro now. So I'm gonna grab a couple pinches of the cilantro in there. This is really something you can do by eye. Pico de gallo is not something you have to measure. The measurements in the recipe are more of a guideline. All right, so that's looking good right now. I can see the cilantro in there, maybe a little more cilantro. Good. And I'm gonna bring the juice of half of a big lime or a whole small lime in there. When you squeeze with your hand, even if you have strong hands, you end up leaving a lot of juice behind. So that's as hard as I can squeeze it with my hand. I'm gonna come in with my reamer and I'm gonna get more juice out, so much more juice out of it. So this citrus reamer I use all the time on lemons, limes, and oranges. I mean, it's like literally half the juice that you're discarding if you don't use it. So there's other types of citrus juicers that you can employ, but this is my favorite. It's just, I get the most power from it. I feel like I'm not wasting anything. So I'm gonna start with that half the lime, and I can use the other half if I want. But the next thing I need is salt. I've gotta put salt in here or it's not gonna taste good. So this is where I'm gonna use my fine salt, like table salt or fine sea salt. I'm not gonna use kosher in here because it doesn't dissolve right away. So a couple pinches of salt, and then we have to taste. So just toss that lime juice and the salt around. All the flavors are gonna start to combine with the juices of the tomato coming out and the juices of the onion. And that's what makes it seem saucy. It's just the lime juice plus the juices being pulled out of the tomato and the onion from the salt draws it out. All right. So you gotta taste it with what you're gonna eat it on. So if I'm eating it with chips, I'm gonna taste it with chips. All right, so I've got my tortilla chips there. They are going to be a little bit salty themselves, so I want to see if the salt level on the pico de gallo is right with the salt on the chips. So the scoops are nice for this, but I don't have scoops right now, so I'm going to taste it. All right, it needs more lime juice because it doesn't taste bright and fresh enough, and maybe a little bit more salt too. So I'm gonna go in and add some more lime juice. Make it very bright and refreshing, and then a little bit more salt, like that. So much of cooking is seasoning and adjusting. In baking, you don't get that chance because once you put it in the oven, it's done. But with cooking, you really get to perfect things before the die is cast, before you're gonna have to eat them. So just toss it around and taste it again. Now it tastes right. It's bright. I can taste the flavors of the tomato, the onion, the cilantro, the lime juice. All of those things come out when the salt level is correct. So that's our pico de gallo. I would just move it to a pretty bowl that's easily, scoopable out of. And it looks so colorful and bright. And anyone is gonna be blown away by how fresh and delicious that tastes compared to store-bought pico de gallo if you ever got it in one of those plastic tubs. No comparison. Ready to go for our party. And we got lots of practice on knife skills. It's a great recipe for that, and then you get to eat it. So I love it for a weekend. You can eat it all weekend long. Have a great day, guys.